All right, a lot of prescriptions on the table. We could spend, I think, an hour and more talking about any one of them. But I promised that all of you that I want to give you a chance to ask the panelists questions. So there are microphones out there. You've all seen them. Please line up, and I'll try to call on you in order. Yes, sir. I think you were first over here on this side. No.
I need a little tech support. Okay, thank you. Judy, thank you so much. Panelists, thank you. Henry Ramos, President of the Insight Center. Really, really thrilled with the conversation that you've helped us start. I think we would resonate with all of the policy prescriptions that were just enumerated. However, I wonder, looking at history, as at least I assess it, it seems to me that in every epoch of American growth that involves shared prosperity, dating back probably to the Civil War, major federal governmental initiative was necessary to create the even playing field and the conditions for shared prosperity. The investment in the Intercontinental Railroad, the development of our school system and public health systems, the sort of ways that we kind of advanced the GI Bill and motivated a whole generation of housing upstarts and jobs that went with that, investment in the NASA program, the internet. How can we possibly expect, given the data that we're looking at, to have significant gains that go beyond the margins if we are not talking about a much more robust federal governmental role, both in terms of taxation and redistribution and in terms of investment in infrastructure enhancement, a green technology economy, a generational impulse to create the kind of thrust in jobs and upward mobility that in past iterations we've seen exclusively through the federal governmental leadership role?
Good question. Who wants to tackle first? Dean Baker.
Well, I'd agree with you. Certainly the history is pretty clear. The federal government's played a leading role in the economy, most obviously after World War II, but the turn of the century, we could point to this, the railroads, in the 19th century. So I'd love to see that, but, just as a practical matter, I've been watching long enough, things don't look great here. You do whatever you can, and one of the things that, I think's been encouraging to me is we've seen a lot of things at the state level, and let's not forget some of these states, i.e. California, are big. So California could do a lot on its own, and what I would hope is you show successes at the state levels and it can be adopted federally, and there is precedent for that. A lot of the great policies that were adopted during the New Deal, those began in the states. So you do what you can. If we can't do it at the federal level, we see what state you could do it in and show successes, make sure they're good programs, and hopefully they'll spread.
You need to, just very quickly, you need to walk and chew gum at the same time. You need to push both at the state and local level and have that be coordinated with the federal push and echoing those same kinds of agendas at both at the same time, I would argue.
Yeah, I think we have to remember that state experimentation never seems to reach Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, South Carolina. And so unfortunately, as with the Affordable Care Act, it means a lot of African Americans got left behind. But given the level of inequality, going forward, we have to change the discussion from deficit, meaning just the fiscal deficit, to the societal deficit, because we're not going to get the right mix if the bottom 80% continues to control the small share of the economy that it does. So if we don't change the conversation to what is the national deficit, which means our infrastructure has to be part of the deficit, which means our de-investment in higher education has to be part of the discussion. And we're not going to get the entrepreneurial zeal. We know that the new firm formation has slowed as inequality has risen. And that's because at high levels of inequality, it's not possible to start a new firm. You just think, what most small companies do is meet the masses. If the masses don't have money, I can't do that. You cut down on innovation because you've cut down on the market size. Chasing what Paris Hilton wants to buy is different than chasing what 18 million people want to buy. And it's easier to have that creation. So we must change the way we talk about deficits. It has to be the national deficit. It has to be a national vision of what do we as a nation need, how do we get it, and until we restore wage growth, then we're going to have to see that gap made up for with government.
I would mention healthcare as another drain on our economy. Just as Dean was talking about trade, I think that it's in a sense draining a lot of demand out of the economy to support the bloated healthcare system we have, which doesn't provide us any better results than other countries. If, in principle, we could reallocate a lot of those dollars to other sources, all of a sudden some of the projects which now are so budget constrained, all of a sudden you couldn't make that argument anymore.
We need more trade in healthcare.
Yeah, that's probably right. And kind of linking back to an earlier point Bill was making, the evidence that I've seen suggests one of the reasons that black college completion rates rose so much in the 1960s was desegregation of healthcare in the South. So health outcomes have not only the immediate impact of all of the dollars we're spending, but improved health would have tremendous opportunities, particularly for the most vulnerable parts of the population.
Interesting point. Yes, sir, right here.
Good morning. My name is Gerald Lenoir. I'm a consultant for the Haas Institute at UC Berkeley. And I didn't hear any, in the prescriptions that were given by the panelists, any talk about regulation of the financial sector. The housing crisis was caused by manipulation and speculation within the financial sector, which increased the racial wealth gap and shrunk the middle class. So what are your prescriptions for regulation of the financial sector?
Well, let me just mention that the Dodd-Frank Act and some of the other regulations, Basel III and other sorts of things, actually has increased the amount of regulation a lot. And if you listen to the banks, they're complaining a lot. And so you should probably consider that a success if you think that that was needed. And I think a measure of just, I think Heather's point about the financial sector, again, we're talking about another drain, sort of pulling vitality out of the rest of the economy. If you look at the stock prices of the big banks, with a few exceptions, they're trading below book value, which means that the business model is not as attractive as it used to be. And so I think much of what you're, I think, asking for is in process right now. There has been a huge increase in regulation of the financial sector. Now, whether it will be completely successful, we don't know, but at least in terms of tightening the screws, it's happening.
Well, and an additional thing we need, because I think Bill was right on making sure we don't have huge fluctuations. We really have to stop huge increases in unemployment caused by financial collapse and then not having the resources for it. We must have a financial transactions tax. I don't like it as the Robin Hood tax because I don't think it should just be spent. But the point of the financial transactions tax is to give visibility to all the shadow deals that make it difficult to regulate banks. If bankers know that every time they do a transaction, they owe a tax, they're going to make their trades more visible. Because the moment we catch them, instead of giving us some fancy accounting, I did this, did that, it didn't fit your regulation, we're going to say, whatever your fancy accounting, that was a transaction, where's my $8 million, where's my penalty, where's my interest? And by making it visible, we can cut down on it, and to the extent that the risk does occur, which is inherent to the financial system, to the extent that it comes true, taking that financial transactions tax, using it as a trust fund to make the long-term public investments that are necessary at way lower interest rates, which would reflect their longer rate of return, whether it's infrastructure, human capital, like college education, where the payoff is over a long period, whatever. It means that when we have the downturn, we have the money already in place. We don't need to have a big debate about how do we maintain public investment during a downturn, which we now know has to be protected. How do we protect our cities like Detroit, which should not go bankrupt because of the effect of the downturn? So I think we need to add that.
Okay. You want to quickly say something, because we've got other people to ask
Yeah,
questions.
I mean,
Only
huge
7
fan of-
minutes left.
Huge fan of the financial transactions tax as well. I'm just pleased, you know, it's great to have Bill. I know Bill's supported a long time, but we had Chris Van Hollen. I'm not endorsing him, but but he did come out for this as one of the leaders of the Democratic Party, so that makes us now a respectable position as opposed to fringies like Bill and I talking about it. But the other point I'll just make, I go on about the big banks. I'd still like to see them broken up, but the other point that I just think is fascinating, we were talking about subprime loans, auto loans, and this is almost a caricature because they were supposed to be included in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There was a member of Congress who was an auto dealer and said, oh, no, you can't include auto loans. guess what? We have a huge problem of subprime loans in the auto market. And, this is just kind of like a no-brainer. There was no excuse. It was purely political. It would be great to have that covered. Again, it's not the end of the world. It's not as bad as what we saw with the housing thing, but you have a lot of low-income people, disproportionately minorities, who've really been hit by those, and it was easily preventable.
All right, we've only got about 5 or 6 minutes left. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Yes.
Okay. Judy, you had asked about what caused the current inequality. Would the panel like to comment on some political economy factors like the proliferation of lobbyist firms in the early 2000s?
The proliferation of
Lobbying companies.
lobbying companies, okay.
And most of them are lobbying for the well-off. And the wave of deregulation, government regulators being asleep on the job while subprime and predatory lending grew in leaps and bounds during that same period, the 2000s. So would you like to comment on that?
Does anybody want to weigh in on that?
I'll just weigh in briefly because I do want to get to all the questions. I think that there's so many different aspects of our political process that promoted inequality over recent decades that it's hard to know where to begin. I think you bring up some of them, but allowing, it's not just political decisions, but alongside of those changing cultures and values where we now have CEOs that are being paid much more than they were a few decades ago, and somehow that's okay, whereas it hadn't have been before. But I do think, and we don't have time to go through all of those, but I think going through that list and making sure that we're attending to rethinking that is exactly what we need to be doing.
Anybody else on that? Okay, next question, thank you.
Okay, so at the risk of sounding a little obtuse, I would like to ask you guys your feelings and at best your diagnosis of what's going on in Baltimore, Maryland right now. I think it's both at the macro level and the micro level. It's a microcosm of what's going on across the country, very economically depressed city. I saw an article, the organization or the institution that put this research out escapes me, but they said that some of these cities like Baltimore are even worse than third world countries in some ways. And I would like to ask, even after integration, very quickly, I'm almost done. After integration, black businesses left these cities because those upper mobility left. Black schools shut down. So now we find a situation where they are even worse off than prior to integration in a lot of these cities. And I would like to know you all's feelings because you're economists, and economists have all the solutions.
Judy?
Heavy burden on all of you.
Let me just...
Heather Boucher.
Let me just, I was thinking about this all morning, actually, in preparation for this panel. I spent some time on Facebook, and I was thinking about the intersection between what happened in Baltimore and today. And I think, as an economist, for me, what really is just so apparent and has been going on for, many of us have been studying these things for a long time, so we've known that the vast disparities by race in the United States and how that plays out across places. These moments show us that this isn't just about that community. These affect all of us and affect us in profoundly, deeply personal ways, but also they affect this thing that we call the economy. We can't have a healthy United States and a competitive economy as long as we're leaving so many people out. If nothing else, it's disruptive and it leads to this kind of situation. So I think as an economist, I hope that these kinds of moments galvanize people to take a deeper and more serious look at what has been going on the money side of the equation and how unless we fix that and create more equity there, I as an economist don't know how you create more equity in the political space or in the civil rights space when you have these really big differences in the access to resources that people have. So it's made me think deeply about it, but it's super important.
Yeah, I don't think we need to reduce everything to economics. It is clear that black lives don't matter when there's no accountability. What is upsetting people isn't that another black man is killed who's unarmed. It's that there's no accountability. Whoever is held responsible, when does that happen? The police officer doesn't know whether he was a local business owner, whether he was a student at Morgan State. So we understand that this is at a very hurtful and visceral level that no one is held accountable. Now we have this ridiculous story where, just think about it now, the man's neck is broken, he can't control his body, we know he wasn't strapped in, so the car is moving and he's bouncing around, and we have some idiot who wants to favor to the police saying, oh, I think he was banging himself deliberately against the wall. This is like those stupid lynching stories where we think that the person committed suicide after they were chained and then shot and then stabbed 8 times, and the last stabbing was obviously the suicide. So I think the issue is that if society doesn't think a black man matters, period, how do you think I'm getting treated when I apply for a job?
I'll just add a small thing to what Bill just said, agreeing with everything, but some of you may have seen, that story was on the front page of the Washington Post, printed at face value, all sourced to someone who does not have a name. Someone should be accountable at the Washington Post.
We are at 12:15, unfortunately. I know there are other questions to be asked. It's been a terrific panel. Let's give them a big hand. Thank you all very much.